To me, there's something special about a good point-and-shoot film camera. A camera which strips away all the hassles of photography that might take you out of the moment, and strips it down to nothing more than a shutter button. At their best, point-and-shoot film cameras can be this tool that lets you capture the moment better than any digital sensor ever could. At their worst, they're unreliable and will end up taking that special moment you chose to capture and spit it back in a blurry, incorrectly exposed mess of an image. That now brings us to the Fujifilm Cardia Mini Tiara, a camera exclusively released in Japan 31 years ago in 1994, which at the time of release was the smallest point-and-shoot film camera ever made, at least with autofocus, and still to this day remains one of the smallest cameras I've ever used. The Fujifilm Cardia Mini Tiara was the first in a now long forgotten line of mini film cameras, which comprised the original Tiara, the Tiara IXZ, an APS film camera, and the Tiara Zoom, a slightly chunkier version of the Tiara which featured a zoom lens and a darker aperture. There was also a second version of the Tiara, which changed very little, but it was also sold in Europe. This camera, upon its release, remained the smallest point-and-shoot 35mm film camera for 2 years. Then the much more expensive Minolta TC1 released, taking its spot as the smallest point-and-shoot film camera ever, which it still holds today. Regardless of the history though, how does this camera hold up today? The Tiara, unlike its Minolta titanium counterpart, is made out of aluminum, which if you've ever held one of Fujifilm's modern, more budget-end cameras, like think the XA series, the XM5, or even the XE series, it feels very similar in quality to one of those cameras. Held beneath its sliding door is an f3.5 28mm lens. This is not the brightest camera in the world, and because of that, the flash is on by default. There are two major caveats that I want to talk about when it comes to the images that come out of this camera. The first caveat is the shutter speed. Now, I'm not exactly sure why this is, but for some reason, this camera seems to always pick a lower shutter speed than I think it needs. I will be shooting in broad daylight and the image that it pumps out has motion blur in it, and I don't fully understand why. The second caveat is a plus or a minus depending on your own personal preference, but the lens does have a noticeable vignette. Pushing those two caveats out of the way for a moment, I think the vast majority of the images that come out of this camera look great. The autofocus is fantastic and the images are sharp. Again, with some vignetting in the corners. One thing that I do want to note with the autofocus on this camera is that it focuses after you have fully pressed in the shutter. So what that can result in is you pull up the camera to take a photo, you click, and the actual photo is taken a second later. Outside of the images, I think that there are a few more things that are worthy of praise on this 30-plus-year-old camera. I've only owned this camera for about a month, but again, I have owned its sibling, the Tiara Zoom, for over a year at this point, and I've been impressed that there have been zero technical electronic issues with either of these cameras. The screens on both of these cameras have worked perfectly, all of the buttons have worked, and I haven't had any light leak in any of my images. These cameras are just made very well, and they've held up to the test of time. I'm not saying that these will never fail. Unfortunately, with these cameras which rely 100% on electronics, eventually one day they will. But that day isn't today. Another thing that I'm very happy with the Tiara series of cameras in general, this one included, is that when you insert a roll of film into its special DL or drop-in loading film thing, it unspools the entire roll, meaning that every shot that you take is safe in case if anything happened to expose your film. A lot of the times while I'm making one of these videos, I'll find myself absent-mindedly fidgeting with whatever camera it is that I'm talking about. And it's during this fidgeting that I realized just how tiny this camera really is in comparison to anything else. This is the Kodak Ektar. It's a half-frame, fully manual camera. It has a fixed shutter speed, a fixed aperture, and no electronics outside of the flash. You can't even focus it. This camera is noticeably bigger than the Tiara, despite the Tiara being packed full of electronics. The Tiara's height and size in general is barely bigger than the roll of film that's inside of it. And you might think that the difference in size between these two cameras wouldn't make a practical difference, but in actuality, this camera feels completely different in your pocket. The Ektar I would describe as pocketable, but not really comfortable. It'll fit in your pocket, but you're going to know that it's there the whole time. On the other hand, the Tiara is able to do something that very few cameras are able to do outside of my phone, and that's be comfortable in my pocket. That makes it so much easier to always have this camera with you, and I don't think that can be overstated. So ultimately, when everything is said and done, is this camera worth your time? Yeah, I think it is. There are aspects of it for sure that I wish could be a little better, like the shutter speed, for instance, or the lens focusing after you fully press the shutter. But for me, this camera perfectly fills that point and shoot hole in my life. It's a film camera that I can always have with me and takes up little to no space. Its size, its reliability, and its photos all add up to make this perfect little film camera for me. And not to mention that it is significantly cheaper than something like a Minolta TC1. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless.